Good evening, night wanderers, and welcome to Nachtmare Witness. Here, true and forgotten stories step out of the shadows, told in a calm voice to help you relax, clear your mind, and slowly drift into sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, tell me where you are listening from. Leave your city or country in the comments below. It is always wonderful to see how far these stories travel through the night. You may hear a few short ads near the beginning of the video. After that, there will be no more interruptions, only the quiet darkness, the gentle sound of my voice, and the strange stories waiting ahead. So, lower the lights, get comfortable, and allow the world around you to slowly disappear. And if you enjoy peaceful nights filled with true fear, mystery, and unexplained events, please like the video, subscribe to Nachtmare Witness, and turn on notifications. Now close your eyes, take a slow breath, and listen carefully. Tonight, the darkness has something to tell you. About 2 years ago, I had one of the most unsettling experiences of my life while driving home alone after a family reunion. It was already late at night when I left. I still had around 2 hours of driving ahead of me, and part of me had already regretted not staying overnight with my family. They had offered, and honestly, it would have been the smarter choice. But I had work the next morning, and I knew that if I slept there, I would have to wake up early, pack my things, and drive all the way back before starting my day. So I told myself I would be fine. I said goodbye, got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the warm lights of my family's house. At first, everything felt normal. The roads were quiet in the way roads only get late at night. Most people were already home, already asleep, already safe behind locked doors and bedroom windows. There were long stretches where I barely saw another vehicle. Every now and then, headlights would appear in the distance, pass by, and disappear behind me, leaving me alone again with the dark road and the sound of my own tires. Most of the drive took me through areas surrounded by thick trees and overgrown bushes on both sides. During the day, that kind of road probably would have looked peaceful, maybe even pretty. But at night, it felt completely different. The trees were packed closely together, forming dark walls on either side of the road. The branches blocked out most of the moonlight, and the bushes seemed to press close to the edge of the pavement, like they were waiting for something to come too near. It was the kind of road that makes your imagination start working even when you do not want it to. The kind of road people always drive down in horror movies right before everything goes wrong. The kind of place where someone says, "It's just a shortcut," and everyone watching knows they should have stayed on the main road. I tried not to think that way. I had music playing softly. I kept my eyes on the road. I reminded myself that I had driven at night before, and nothing bad had ever happened. The road was empty, yes, but empty did not mean dangerous. Trees were just trees. Darkness was just darkness. I was tired, but I was not scared. For the first 45 minutes, I was completely fine. Then, without warning, exhaustion hit me. It was not the normal kind of tired where you yawn a few times and think about stopping for coffee. This was different. It felt like someone had flipped a switch inside my body. One moment I was awake, alert, and focused on getting home. The next moment, my eyelids felt heavy, my thoughts slowed down, and I had to force myself to keep looking at the road. I blinked harder. I sat up straighter. I turned the music louder. I rolled my shoulders and tried to wake myself up. But the tiredness did not lift. It got worse. My body felt like it was sinking into the seat, and every dark stretch of road ahead started to blur into the next. You know that sudden wave of exhaustion that feels almost unnatural? The kind where you are surprised by how fast it takes over? That was exactly how it felt. I knew I could not keep driving like that. I also knew how dangerous it was to fight sleep behind the wheel. I had always heard people say that if you are too tired to drive, you should pull over and rest. In that moment, that advice felt simple and logical. The problem was, there was nowhere good to stop. The road kept going through trees and darkness. No gas stations, no rest areas, no parking lots, no well-lit places where I could safely sit for a few minutes and gather myself. Every time I thought there might be a turnoff or a clearing, it turned out to be nothing but another shadowy gap between bushes. Every few minutes, another car passed by, and that somehow made stopping feel even worse. If I pulled over somewhere random, I would be alone in my car on the side of a dark road, visible to anyone who came by. I did not like the idea of that. I did not like the thought of another driver slowing down, noticing me, wondering why I was there, but I was getting too tired to keep going. Eventually, I had to admit the truth. I was not going to make it home unless I stopped. So, I made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time, but looking back now, I still wonder how close it came to being a terrible mistake. I pulled my car off the road onto the grass and parked behind a group of bushes. My thinking was simple. If I parked a little off the road, behind the bushes, my car would be harder to see from passing traffic. I would not be sitting directly on the shoulder where anyone could easily spot me. I could lock the doors, sleep for a short while, and then continue driving once I felt awake enough. At the time, it felt like the safest option available. That is the thing about bad decisions. They usually do not feel bad when you are making them. They feel practical. They feel like the best choice in a bad situation. I checked the time on the dashboard. 11:22 p.m. I remember the exact time because I looked at it carefully. I wanted to know how long I would sleep. I thought maybe 20 or 30 minutes would be enough. Just a short rest. Just enough to get my eyes open again and stop myself from drifting off on the road. I locked the doors. I leaned my seat back. I kept my keys close. I told myself I would be fine. Then I closed my eyes. Within minutes, I was asleep. I do not know how long I had been out when I woke up the first time. At first, I did not even open my eyes all the way. I was still caught in that heavy, confused space between sleep and waking up. My body did not want to move. My mind was slow. For a second, I even forgot where I was. Then I heard it, a scratching sound. It was soft at first, almost gentle, like something dragging lightly against the outside of the car. Not loud enough to be an immediate threat, but clear enough that it pulled me out of sleep. I opened my eyes and looked at the dashboard. 11:50 p.m. I had been asleep for less than half an hour. For a few seconds, I just sat there, completely still, listening. Scratch, scratch. Then it stopped. I stared into the darkness beyond the windshield, but I could not see much. The bushes blocked part of the view, and everything beyond them was black. My sleepy brain immediately started giving me normal explanations, because that is what the mind does when it does not want to be afraid. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe a branch was brushing against the car. Maybe the wind had moved something. Maybe I had dreamed it. There were trees and bushes all around me, so an animal seemed possible. A raccoon. A possum. A stray cat. Something small and curious moving around the car. That made sense. That was easy to believe. And I was still so tired, so I ignored it. I closed my eyes again and fell back asleep. The next time I woke up, the sound was back. But this time, it did not feel the same. I opened my eyes slowly and saw the dashboard clock. 12:40 am. Almost an hour had passed. For a moment, I was confused. Then I heard it again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. This time, the sound did not stop after a few seconds. It kept going. Slow, light, repeated, somewhere outside the car. The tiredness was still there, but fear started cutting through it. I stayed completely still and listened. My heart began to beat faster. The car suddenly felt smaller than it had before. The darkness outside felt closer. The bushes I had parked behind no longer felt like protection. They felt like something hiding me from the road, but also hiding everything outside from me. I tried to tell myself again that it was probably an animal. But then a thought came into my mind. If it was just an animal, why was it still there? And if it had gone away earlier, why had it come back almost an hour later? The scratching continued. I slowly moved my eyes toward the rearview mirror. I did not want to turn my head too quickly. I did not want to make noise. I did not even know why, but some instinct told me not to let whatever was outside know I was awake. At first I saw nothing, just darkness. The faint outline of the road behind me, the shapes of trees and bushes blending together into one black wall. Then something moved. It happened fast, so fast I almost doubted myself. A figure shifted near the back of my car and moved away into the trees. I only caught a glimpse of it, but it was enough. It was not an animal. I could not make out details. I could not see a face, clothing, or anything clear enough to describe. But the shape, the height, the movement, all of it felt wrong for an animal. Something had been near my car. Something had been close enough to make that sound. And now it was disappearing into the forest. My whole body went cold. Suddenly, every scary story I had ever heard about lonely roads came rushing back into my mind. Stories about people who pull over at night and hear something outside the car. Stories about someone pretending to need help. Stories about cars left on the side of the road as bait. Stories about people who get out for just 1 second and never come back. I hated that my mind went there, but I could not stop it. Because I was alone. I was hidden behind bushes. It was after midnight, and something that was not an animal had just moved away from my car. All at once, the place I had chosen to feel less visible felt like the worst possible place I could have parked. I was no longer simply off the road resting. I was tucked away in the dark, separated from traffic, in a spot where someone could approach my car without being easily seen. I did not care about being tired anymore. The exhaustion vanished almost instantly, replaced by pure panic. I wanted to leave. I wanted light. I wanted other cars. I wanted any sign of normal life. I started the engine as quietly as I could, though in the silence it sounded too loud. I put the car into drive and pulled back onto the road without checking anything outside. I did not roll down a window. I did not open the door. I did not step out to see if there were scratches on the car. I did not want to know. I just drove. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers started to ache. I kept looking in the mirrors every few seconds, expecting to see movement behind me, expecting someone to step out from the bushes, expecting headlights to suddenly appear. The road ahead curved less than 100 yards away. As I came around the bend, I saw something that made my stomach drop all over again. There was another car parked on the side of the road. The driver's side door was open. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in the most normal way possible. Maybe someone had broken down. Maybe the driver had pulled over to check a tire. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe this was completely unrelated to what had just happened. I slowed down slightly, not enough to stop, just enough to look as I passed. There was nobody inside. The driver's seat was empty. The door hung open toward the road. The inside of the car looked dark and still. There was something deeply wrong about seeing an open car door in the middle of nowhere at that hour. It did not look like a normal breakdown. It looked abandoned in a hurry. I wanted to help if someone truly needed help. I really did. But every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep going. So I did. I passed the car, but I looked into my rear view mirror. At first, I saw nothing, just darkness behind me. Then, suddenly, someone appeared around the bend. A person came running into the road behind me, running directly toward my car. My entire body went cold. The person was moving fast, faster than someone casually trying to flag down help. Their arms moved sharply. Their body leaned forward like they were chasing. Then, I heard them shouting, "Hey! Hey! You! Get out of your car! Now!" The words hit me like ice. Not "help me," not "call 911," not "please stop." Get out of your car. Now, I cannot fully explain the fear that went through me in that moment. A person had been near my car in the dark. I had just passed an empty vehicle with its driver's door open. Now someone was running after me from around the same bend, yelling at me to get out. Maybe they needed help. Maybe something terrible had happened. Maybe they were scared too. But there was something about the command in their voice that did not sound like someone asking for help. It sounded like someone giving an order. And in the middle of a dark, wooded road after midnight, that was not a chance I was willing to take. My instincts answered before my brain could. I pressed the gas pedal. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I did not roll down my window. I did not wait to find out why someone was chasing my car and demanding that I get out. I drove as fast as I safely could, my eyes jumping between the road ahead and the mirrors behind me. The person disappeared into the darkness as the distance grew, but I still felt like they were somehow close. I kept expecting headlights behind me. I kept expecting that open-doored car to start moving. I kept expecting to see something in the road ahead that would force me to stop. For miles, I did not relax. Every curve looked dangerous. Every shadow on the shoulder looked like a person. Every dark gap between trees looked like someone could step out of it. The road that had felt empty before now felt watched. I no longer felt like I was driving through the woods. I felt like I was escaping them. I did not stop again. Not for coffee, not for gas, not to check my car, not to think. I kept driving until the area changed, until there were more lights, more houses, more signs of people. Only then did I begin to breathe normally again. Even then, I could not shake the feeling that something had almost happened, and I had only avoided it by not getting out. I never saw that person again. I never found out who they were. I never found out what happened to the car parked on the side of the road with the driver's door open. And I never found out what was scratching at my car. That is the part that still bothers me. Maybe the scratching really was from an animal at first. Maybe the figure I saw was someone unrelated who happened to be walking through the trees. Maybe the car around the bend had broken down and the person running after me genuinely needed help. Maybe all of it had a normal explanation, but the pieces never felt normal together. The scratching near my car, the figure disappearing into the forest, the open car door around the bend, the person running after me, the shouting, "Get out of your car!" It all happened too close together, in a place too empty, at a time too late. I know some people might say I should have stopped if someone needed help, but anyone who has been alone on a dark road at night knows that fear changes the way you hear things. A person asking for help sounds one way. A person ordering you out of your car sounds completely different. And when your body tells you something is wrong, sometimes the safest thing you can do is listen. I still think about what might have happened if I had stepped out to check the scratching. That thought makes my stomach tighten even now. What if I had opened the door and walked around to the back of the car? What if someone had been crouched near the bushes? What if the scratching was meant to wake me up and make me curious? What if the figure I saw leaving was not leaving at all, but only moving into a better position? What if the car around the bend was part of the same situation? I do not know. And not knowing is what keeps the memory alive. because sometimes the scariest part of a story is not what happened. It is what almost happened. It is the version of the night that could have existed if you had made one different decision. If I had ignored my fear and gone outside. If I had stopped for the person running behind me. If I had let exhaustion convince me that everything was harmless. Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe I would have helped someone. Or maybe I would not be here telling this story. That night taught me something I will never forget. Never convince yourself that sleeping alone on the side of a deserted road at night is a good idea just because you are too tired to keep driving. Exhaustion makes bad choices look reasonable. Fear makes every sound feel bigger. And the dark makes it almost impossible to know the difference between danger and coincidence. But if you ever wake up alone in your car, hidden behind bushes on a road surrounded by trees, and you hear something scratching outside your door, do not get out to investigate. Start the car. Lock the doors. Leave. Because sometimes the safest answer to a sound in the dark is not finding out what made it. A few summers ago, I had one of the most unsettling experiences of my life while riding my bike home late at night. It was around midnight when I went out for a bike ride with a friend. It was one of those warm summer nights where you do not really want to go home yet. The air felt calm, the streets were quiet, and everything had that strange, peaceful feeling that only happens late at night, when most people are already inside and the outside world feels like it belongs to only a few people. At first, nothing about the night felt dangerous. My friend and I had been riding around, talking, laughing, and wasting time the way people do when they do not have anywhere important to be. We were not doing anything strange. We were not looking for trouble. We were just enjoying the night before, eventually deciding it was time to head back. My friend went one way, and I started riding home alone. My house was not far. I only had about 2 blocks left, so I was not nervous. I knew the area well. I had taken that route many times before, both during the day and at night. It was the kind of neighborhood where everything felt familiar to me. I knew the turns, the houses, the sidewalks, the streetlights, and even the darker spots where the lights did not reach properly. But familiar places can feel completely different after midnight. During the day, those streets were normal. Cars passed by. People walked their dogs. Kids rode bikes. Neighbors stood outside. The buildings looked ordinary, and the corners were just corners. But at night, especially when the streets are empty, everything changes. The same houses look closed off. The same alleys look deeper. The same sidewalks feel longer. Even the sound of your own bike tires against the pavement seems louder than it should. Because of construction in the area, I could not ride on the road like I normally would. The road was partly blocked off, so I had to use the sidewalk instead. That already made the ride feel a little awkward. The sidewalk was narrow, and riding on it forced me closer to the houses, fences, and dark spaces between buildings. Still, I did not feel scared. I was almost home. I just wanted to get there, put my bike away, and go inside. The streets were dead quiet. There were barely any cars around. I did not see anyone standing outside. No one was sitting on their porch. No one was walking nearby. It was the kind of quiet where every little sound stands out, but because nothing had happened yet, I did not think much of it. Then I reached the corner where I needed to turn left onto my street. That was when I noticed the man. He was walking alone on the sidewalk ahead of me. He looked like he was probably in his 40s. He was a little scruffy, but not in a way that immediately made him seem homeless or dangerous. His clothes did not stand out. His walk did not seem strange at first. He just looked like an ordinary man walking by himself late at night, and that is one of the reasons the memory still bothers me. He did not look like a threat when I first saw him. He did not look like someone I needed to avoid. He did not look like someone who was about to turn a normal ride home into something I would remember for years. If anything, he looked like the kind of person you would pass without thinking twice. The sidewalk was too narrow for me to ride around him comfortably without warning him. I did not want to suddenly come up behind him and startle him. I was only trying to be polite, the way you normally would if you are on a bike and someone is walking in front of you. When I got about 6 feet behind him, I called out, "Hey, behind you." That was all I said. I expected him to move slightly to the side. Maybe he would glance back, nod, and keep walking. Maybe he would not react much at all. It should have been a simple moment, a normal moment. Instead, he turned around, and the second he looked at me, I felt something change. His face was angry, not confused, not startled, not annoyed in a normal way. Angry, it was a sharp, direct kind of anger, the kind that hits you before a person even says anything. His eyes locked onto me like I had done something terrible to him. For 1 second, I was so confused that I did not even know how to react. I had not touched him. I had not insulted him. I had not tried to scare him. I had only warned him that I was behind him. But the look he gave me made my stomach tighten. It was the kind of look that makes you suddenly aware of how empty the street is. I did not stop to explain myself. I did not say anything else. I just turned onto my street and kept riding. At first, I thought that would be the end of it. I told myself maybe he was just in a bad mood. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was dealing with something and I happened to surprise him at the wrong time. People are strange sometimes. Not every weird interaction means danger. I tried to push it out of my mind because I was almost home. Then I heard him behind me. At first it was just movement. Footsteps, maybe. The sound of someone walking faster than before. I tried not to overreact. Maybe he was going in the same direction. Maybe he lived on my street. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Then he started yelling. The sound of his voice tore through the quiet street. He was screaming at me, not just complaining, not just saying I had scared him. He was shouting horrible names at me, his voice echoing down the empty sidewalk and between the houses. Then he started yelling that he was going to kill me. That was the moment the night stopped feeling normal. There is a huge difference between someone acting strange and someone threatening to kill you while following you on an empty street at midnight. My whole body reacted at once. My hands tightened on the handlebars. My legs pushed harder. My heart started pounding so fast that I could feel it in my chest and throat. The street around me felt suddenly too quiet, too empty, too open. There was no crowd, no cars passing close enough to notice, no people outside who could turn and ask what was happening, no one stepping in, just me on my bike and this man behind me, screaming threats into the night. And then I realized something that made everything worse. My house was right there. Normally, being close to home would have been comforting. If something scares you outside, the first thing you want to do is get home. Lock the door, turn on the lights, tell someone what happened. But in that moment, being close to home became a problem. Because if I went straight home, he would know exactly where I lived. He would see the house. He would see where I stopped. He would see which door I walked through. And if he was angry enough to follow me and scream that he was going to kill me, I did not want him knowing any of that. I made the decision quickly. I did not turn into my house. Instead, I kept riding. I decided to make a loop around the block. It was the only thing I could think to do. My plan was simple. I would keep moving, wait for him to lose interest or disappear, and then come back when it felt safe. It seemed like the smartest option at the time. As I rode away from my own house, I could still hear him behind me for a while. His voice followed me through the street, getting slightly farther, but still loud enough to make my skin crawl. I kept expecting him to stop. I kept expecting the whole thing to end. Part of me still wanted to believe this was just a random outburst from a stranger who would forget about me within a minute. I did not know yet that the worst part of the night had not happened. I rode around the block, trying to stay calm. I remember the strange feeling of being so close to safety and still not being able to go there. Every turn felt too slow. Every stretch of sidewalk felt too long. I kept checking behind me, listening for his voice, listening for footsteps, listening for anything that meant he was still following. After a little while, I thought maybe I had lost him. The shouting had stopped. The street around me was quiet again. That should have made me feel better. But it did not. The silence felt different now. It did not feel peaceful anymore. It felt like something had gone missing from the scene, but not in a safe way. It felt like the man was no longer making noise because he was doing something else. When I finished the loop and came back around, I slowed down and looked toward my street. That was when I saw him. He was standing on my front steps. My front steps. For a moment, I could not understand what I was seeing. My brain almost refused to accept it. The same man who had been screaming threats at me only minutes earlier was now standing outside my house, exactly where I would have gone if I had simply ridden straight home. He was not walking past. He was not on the sidewalk. He was not standing near some random house. He was on my front steps. The fear I felt in that moment was different from the fear I had felt when he was yelling. When he was shouting behind me, I knew he was angry. I knew what direction he was coming from. I knew I needed to get away. But seeing him standing at my house was worse because it meant something I could not explain. How did he know? I had never seen him before. I had never told him where I lived. I had not stopped at my house. I had not pointed toward it. I had only passed him on the sidewalk and then kept riding. But somehow, he had ended up right there, the exact place I had been trying to keep hidden. He stood on the steps, facing out toward the street, like he was waiting for me to come back, like he knew that was where I belonged, like he had guessed, or followed some clue I did not realize I had given him. I felt cold all at once. My house no longer looked like safety. It looked exposed. The porch light, the steps, the front door, everything that should have felt familiar suddenly looked like part of a trap. He had reached the one place I did not want him to reach, and I had no idea how. Then he saw me. As I rode past again, his head turned. He looked directly at me. But this time, he did not scream. He did not run after me. He did not shout threats. He did not call me names. He did not even move much. He just looked at me. Somehow that silence was worse than the yelling. The first time, his anger had been loud and obvious. This time, I had no idea what he was thinking. I did not know if he was waiting for me to stop. I did not know if he wanted me to come closer. I did not know if he was planning something or if he had already done what he came to do by showing me that he knew where I lived. I did not stop. I did not go home. I kept riding. My body was acting faster than my thoughts. I knew I could not go near my front door while he was there. I knew I could not let him corner me on the steps. I knew I could not risk getting off my bike with him between me and the house. So I rode past and went back to my friend's place. That ride felt much longer than it should have. Every sound behind me made me turn my head. Every shadow at the side of the street looked like a person. I kept expecting him to appear again. I kept expecting to hear his voice. I kept expecting to see him standing somewhere ahead of me, as if the whole neighborhood had somehow become a maze he knew better than I did. When I got to my friend's place, I finally let myself breathe a little. But I still did not feel safe. My mind kept replaying the image of him on my front steps. I could not get past it. I could understand him following me for a short distance. I could understand him being angry or unstable. What I could not understand was how he had ended up exactly at my house. Later, I texted my mom and told her what had happened. It was a difficult situation because there was not much anyone could do in that exact moment. I did not know his name. I did not know where he came from. I did not know where he went after I rode away. I did not even fully understand what had happened myself. All I had was a story that sounded strange and frightening. A man had followed me. A man had threatened to kill me. A man had somehow found my front steps without me showing him where I lived. Even writing that out now sounds unreal, but that is exactly why it stayed with me. For the rest of the night, I could not stop thinking about what might have happened if I had made a different choice. If I had turned into my house like normal, he would have followed me there while still yelling. If I had tried to unlock the door with shaking hands, he could have reached me before I got inside. If I had gone inside, maybe he would have banged on the door. Maybe he would have waited outside. Maybe he would have tried something worse. I will never know. And maybe that is the part that makes the whole thing feel so creepy. The danger was close enough to imagine, but not clear enough to understand. For 2 days I kept thinking about it. I kept wondering who he was. I kept wondering whether he lived nearby or had seen me before. I wondered if he had already known where I lived somehow. Maybe he had noticed me riding that route on other nights. Maybe he had seen me coming and going before. Maybe, without realizing it, I had been familiar to him long before he became familiar to me. That thought made me feel sick, because the whole time I had assumed he was a stranger. But what if I was not a stranger to him? Then, 2 days later, my bike was stolen from the alleyway by the house. I still do not know if that was connected. Maybe it was a coincidence. Bikes get stolen. It happens all the time. Maybe someone else saw it and took it. Maybe it had nothing to do with the man at all. But the timing made it almost impossible not to think about him. A stranger had followed me home, threatened me, and somehow appeared at my front steps. Then, 2 days later, the bike I had been riding that night disappeared from the alley beside the house. Maybe it was unrelated, but it did not feel unrelated. After that, my mom decided the situation needed to be reported. I think at first it was easy to hope the whole thing would just disappear, that it was one frightening encounter and nothing more. But once the bike was gone, the situation felt like it had reached into our home again. It was no longer just something that happened on the street. It felt closer than that. The thing that still bothers me most is how normal the man looked before everything changed. He did not look like a monster. He did not look like someone from a horror story. He did not look like the kind of person people warn you about. He looked like an ordinary man walking down a sidewalk late at night. Slightly scruffy, maybe, but normal enough that I did not think twice before speaking to him. That is what made it so unsettling. People like to imagine danger is easy to recognize. We want to believe we will see it coming. We picture danger as someone obviously threatening, someone hiding in an alley, someone acting strange from the start. But real life is not always like that. Sometimes danger looks like a normal person on a normal street. Sometimes it starts with a harmless sentence. Sometimes all you do is say, "Hey, behind you." And suddenly, the night changes. I still remember the empty street. I remember the way his voice sounded behind me, bouncing off the quiet houses. I remember the panic of realizing I could not go home because home was exactly what I needed to protect. I remember turning the block and thinking maybe I had lost him. And then I remember seeing him standing on my front steps. That image is the part I can never fully explain away. Because when someone follows you, it is scary. When someone threatens you, it is terrifying. But when someone somehow knows where you are going before you ever get there, that fear becomes something else. It becomes the feeling that you are being watched. It becomes the feeling that the street is not as empty as it looks. It becomes the feeling that someone knows more about you than they should. For a while after that, I hated riding alone at night. Every person walking ahead of me made me nervous. Every narrow sidewalk made me slow down. Every time I had to pass someone, I felt that same tension in my chest. I would think about how quickly a normal interaction can twist into something dangerous. I also became more careful about going straight home if I ever felt like someone was following me. That night taught me something important. When you are scared, home feels like the safest place to run. But if someone is watching you, following you, or threatening you, going straight home can give them exactly what they want. I was lucky I thought of that in time, because if I had not made that loop around the block, I might have led him straight to my door while he was still close behind me. I might have been trying to get inside while he was only a few steps away. I might have turned my back to unlock the door. I might have trapped myself without meaning to. Instead, I saw him before I stopped. I saw him standing there, waiting, and that was enough to tell me not to go home. To this day, I do not know who he was. I do not know why he reacted so violently to me warning him I was behind him. I do not know how he knew where I lived. I do not know if he had been watching me before that night. I do not know if the stolen bike was connected to him, or if it was just one more bad coincidence in a situation that already felt wrong. There are too many unanswered questions, and sometimes unanswered questions are worse than the answers, because your mind keeps going back to them. It keeps building possibilities. It keeps wondering what could have happened if you had been slower, if you had been less careful, if you had trusted the wrong moment. What if I had gone straight home? What if he had been waiting closer to the door? What if I had stopped and he had walked up behind me? What if he had come back later? What if the bike was not a coincidence? I do not know. All I know is that one summer night, I was 2 blocks from home, riding through familiar streets that should have felt safe. I passed a normal-looking man on a sidewalk and said one harmless sentence. A few minutes later, that same man was screaming that he was going to kill me. And when I tried to avoid showing him where I lived, he somehow ended up standing on my front steps anyway. That is the part I still cannot forget. Not his yelling, not even the threats. It was the silence afterward. The way he stood there. The way he looked at me when I rode past. Like he had been waiting. Like he knew exactly where I was supposed to stop. Like the whole time, I was never as close to safety as I thought. When I was very young, I had parents who were incredibly kind and understanding. On weekends, they would let me sleep in the living room instead of my bedroom. It was something I always looked forward to, because my sister was a very light sleeper, and sleeping in the living room meant I could stay awake as late as I wanted without bothering anyone. To me, it felt like having my own little space. The house would become quiet, everyone else would go to sleep, and I would stay on the couch watching late-night television. At the time, it felt like the perfect weekend tradition. Of course, like most kids who think staying awake until sunrise is the greatest idea ever, I usually failed. I would tell myself I was going to stay awake all night. I would make plans. I would promise myself I would watch everything. Then eventually, I would fall asleep on the couch. One night, that is exactly what happened. I was lying on the couch in the living room, watching television late at night. The house was completely quiet. Everyone else was asleep. We lived in rural Georgia, so our surroundings were very different from living in a neighborhood full of streetlights and houses close together. There was a lot of land around us, a lot of trees, the kind of trees that seem to disappear into darkness at night. During the day, they were just normal trees. They were part of the scenery, something you barely noticed. But at night, especially when you are a child lying alone in a quiet house, they became something completely different. The darkness between them felt endless. The shadows looked deeper. Every small sound seemed louder. At some point during the night, I woke up. I don't know exactly what woke me. There was no loud noise, no obvious reason. It was just a strange feeling, a sudden instinct, like some part of me noticed something was wrong before I even understood why. My eyes opened, and almost immediately, I sat straight up. I looked toward the front window. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. The room was dark, but moonlight was shining through the window. The light was bright enough to reveal the shapes outside, and that was when I saw it. A silhouette. Someone was in the tree outside. I froze. For a few seconds, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It didn't make sense. There was just a person-shaped figure sitting or standing in the branches of the tree, completely still. Watching, the moonlight made the outline clear enough that I knew I wasn't just seeing random shadows. There was someone there, outside my house. In the tree. I was terrified. And then, as if my fear needed any help becoming worse, our family dog suddenly ran toward the window. The dog started growling, not a playful growl, not the kind of sound a dog makes when it wants attention. This was different. The dog was focused on whatever was outside, standing at the glass, staring into the darkness, snarling at the figure I had seen. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. Even as a child, I understood that my dog was reacting to something. Something was really there. I didn't wait any longer. I jumped up and ran as fast as I could to my parents' bedroom. I was trying to explain what I saw, but I was scared, and my words were coming out all mixed together. I told them there was someone outside, someone in the tree, someone watching the house. My parents woke up confused at first. They probably thought I had just had a nightmare. After all, kids wake up scared all the time. But something about how frightened I was must have made my dad realize I wasn't just making it up. He got up, grabbed something to defend himself with, and went outside with the dogs. I remember standing there with my mom, shaking, waiting, listening. Every second felt longer than the last. The house that had felt safe only minutes earlier suddenly felt completely different. Every sound made me nervous. Every shadow made me wonder if someone was still outside. I kept imagining the person in the tree, wondering what they wanted, wondering how long they had been there, wondering if they had been watching me before I woke up. Eventually, my dad came back inside. He told us he didn't see anyone. He checked outside, but there was nobody there. No person, no explanation. Nothing. He told me everything was okay and that I should go back to sleep. But I couldn't. How could I? I had just seen someone outside my house. Maybe an adult could explain it away. Maybe there was another reason. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But as a child, all I knew was what I had seen. Someone was there. So I decided I didn't want to sleep in the living room anymore. I went back to my normal bedroom. I told my sister what happened. I remember trying to explain every detail. The tree, the silhouette, the dog reacting, my dad going outside. I don't remember whether she believed me completely, but I know I was still scared. Eventually, the house became quiet again. My dad was walking around doing his normal rounds through the house while drinking coffee. Everything seemed calm. Everyone was still. Slowly, I started convincing myself that maybe it was over. Maybe my dad was right. Maybe there was nobody there. Maybe I could finally sleep. I remember thinking, I can sleep now. But then I looked toward my window, and I saw him. The same person. Outside, I could see the figure in the moonlight. I couldn't see every detail, but I knew it was the same person I had seen before. And then something happened that I still remember. The person raised a hand and made a gesture, a shush signal, like telling me to be quiet, like they knew I was watching, like they knew I could see them. My entire body froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even call for my parents. Then, just as quickly as I had seen them, the person turned around and ran away. Not slowly, not casually. They turned and ran straight away into the darkness. I don't remember exactly how long I cried afterward. It felt like hours. I remember being completely overwhelmed by fear, the kind of fear where you don't just feel scared, you feel helpless. Because I was a child, I was inside my own home, the place where I was supposed to feel safest. But someone had been outside. Someone had been close enough for me to see them, close enough for my dog to react, close enough to make that terrifying gesture at me. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I still wonder who that person was. I still wonder how long they had been there. I still wonder if they were watching the house before I woke up. The strangest part is that nothing else happened. There was no attack, no break-in, no explanation. Just a person in the darkness appearing twice outside my home and leaving behind a memory that never went away. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe there was something I didn't understand. But when you are a child, seeing a stranger outside your window in the middle of the night is not something your mind easily forgets, especially when that person looks directly at you and tells you to stay quiet. Some scary moments are frightening because of what happens. Others are frightening because of what almost happened. And this was one of those moments that stayed with me, because I never found out the truth. I only know what I saw. A person outside my house, a shadow in the trees, a silent warning through the glass, and a night I will never forget. I have been a truck driver for most of my adult life. Over the years, I have driven more roads than I could ever name. Some were wide 4-lane highways that passed through busy cities. Others had 6 lanes filled with impatient drivers, flashing lights, and endless traffic. But most of the roads I traveled were quiet 2-lane routes that stretched through small towns, farmland, forests, and places that seemed to disappear from the map after dark. When you spend that much time behind the wheel, roads begin to blend together. You remember certain gas stations, bridges, sharp turns, or old buildings, but you often forget the names of the roads themselves. Sometimes I could drive through the same place several times and still not remember the highway number. Other times I could travel a road only once and remember every detail for the rest of my life. The road from that night is one I cannot clearly name, but I have never forgotten what happened there. It was sometime in 2014. I was driving through Missouri, southeast of Kansas City, near a small town that I do not remember. I know I was somewhere close to Interstate 44 because my route would eventually take me east. I was headed toward Springfield, Ohio, with a load that had to be delivered the following day. It was around 10 o'clock at night. The traffic had become light, and most of the businesses along the road were already closed. A few gas stations were still open, their bright signs glowing against the dark. Every now and then I passed a house with a porch light on, but most of the area was quiet. The sky was clear and the road ahead was dark except for the reach of my headlights. My engine made that steady, familiar sound that truckers get used to after enough years on the road. The radio was playing quietly, but I was not paying much attention to it. I was mainly focused on the road and thinking about how many more hours I wanted to drive before stopping for the night. I came to a traffic light at a crossroads. The light turned red, so I slowed my rig and brought it to a stop. There were no other vehicles waiting at the intersection. I sat there alone, watching the empty road ahead. That was when I noticed someone standing in the distance. At first, I could not tell what I was looking at. The person was about a quarter of a mile ahead, standing near the side of the road. My headlights did not reach that far, but there was enough light from a street lamp to show the shape of a human figure. The figure raised one arm. Even from that distance, I recognized the gesture. The thumb was pointed toward the road in the familiar sign of someone asking for a ride. I remember staring for a few seconds, trying to decide whether I should stop. Picking up hitchhikers is never a good idea, especially at night. Every truck driver has heard stories about people being robbed, attacked, or tricked after stopping for someone along the road. Most trucking companies also have rules against carrying passengers. Still, the person looked small. From where I sat, I thought it might be a young woman. I looked around the intersection again. The road was empty. There were no houses close by, and no businesses open within walking distance. I wondered how long she had been standing there, and how she had ended up in that place so late at night. I told myself that I would at least drive closer and get a better look. The traffic light turned green. I eased my truck forward, slowly building speed. As I got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a young woman standing beside the road with a travel bag near her feet. She looked to be in her late teens or early 20s. She had long hair and wore clothes that seemed a little old-fashioned for 2014. A sweater was tied around her waist. She wore a short-sleeved V-neck shirt and a pair of cut-off denim shorts that ended high on her thighs. I had no bad intentions toward her. I was simply surprised by the way she was dressed. The outfit reminded me of styles I had seen years earlier, maybe in the late 1990s or early 2000s. It was not impossible for someone to dress that way, but it stood out. She smiled when she saw my truck slowing down. I pulled partly onto the shoulder, leaving enough room between my trailer and the road. I rolled down the passenger side window and leaned across the cab. The young woman grabbed her bag and stepped onto the metal side step below the passenger door. "Where are you headed?" she called. "Springfield, Ohio," I answered. Her face brightened. "Perfect," she said. "I'm going to New York City. I'm going there to make it big." New York City was nowhere near my final destination, but I would be heading east for a long distance. I could at least take her closer than where she was. "You can ride with me for a while," I said. "I'll be stopping near St. Louis later tonight." "That works," she replied quickly. "Anything east helps." I unlocked the passenger door. She opened it, climbed into the cab, and placed her bag on the floor near her feet. It was a medium-sized travel bag made from dark fabric. It looked old and well used, but I did not pay much attention to it at the time. Once she had fastened her seatbelt, I checked my mirrors and pulled back onto the road. Almost immediately, she began talking. She told me she wanted to become famous. She said she had always known she was meant for something bigger than the town where she had grown up. She talked about New York as if it were a magical place where every dream became possible the moment you arrived. "I'm going to be somebody," she said. "People are going to know my name." "What do you want to do?" I asked. "Acting," she said. "Maybe modeling. Singing too if I get the chance." She laughed after saying it, but there was no doubt in her voice. She truly believed she was on her way to a better life. She talked about Times Square, Broadway, movie studios, photographers, and people she hoped to meet. Some of what she said sounded like things she had learned from television rather than real experience. Still, I let her talk. Long drives can become lonely, and having someone in the passenger seat was a change from the usual silence. She spoke with excitement, sometimes so quickly that I had trouble following her. Every few minutes she would look out the window and smile as if she could already see New York waiting ahead. I asked where she had come from. She named a small town, but I did not recognize it. I cannot remember the name now. Does your family know you're leaving? I asked. Her smile weakened slightly. They'll understand later, she said. That answer made me wonder if she had run away from home. I looked at her again. She appeared young, although it was difficult to know exactly how old she was. Her face had a kind of innocence to it, but there was also something tired in her eyes. You should call them, I said. At least let them know you're safe. I will, she replied. She changed the subject immediately and began talking about famous actresses she admired. For the next half hour, she hardly stopped speaking. She told me what kind of apartment she wanted, what clothes she planned to buy, and how she would send money back home after she became successful. There was something almost sad about the way she described it. Her dreams were huge, but she had no clear plan beyond reaching New York City. She had no car, no job waiting, and apparently no safe way to get there. She was traveling alone at night, with only one bag. I considered asking more questions, but I did not want to frighten her or make her feel trapped. I was a stranger after all, and she had trusted me enough to climb into my truck. Eventually, I reached the interstate and turned east. The roads became wider and traffic increased slightly. Cars passed us from time to time, their headlights appearing in my mirrors before moving ahead into the darkness. The young woman continued talking for a while, but her excitement slowly faded. She leaned against the passenger door and looked tired. You doing all right? I asked. Yeah, she said. Just been a long day. She stared through the windshield for several minutes without saying anything. The silence felt different after so much conversation. I could hear the tires rolling over the pavement and the low hum of the engine. The radio had lost its signal and was producing soft static, so I turned it off. After a while, she spoke again. How long until you stop? A few hours, I said. I'm planning to stay at a truck stop outside St. Louis. She nodded. Do you have a place to sleep back there? I glanced toward the curtain behind the seats. Yeah, there's a bunk. Would you mind if I lie down for a while? Go ahead, I said. The bed is already made. Get some sleep and I'll wake you when I stop. She thanked me and unfastened her seatbelt. I watched her step carefully between the seats. She picked up her bag, pulled the curtain aside, and disappeared into the sleeper area behind the cab. A moment later, I heard the bunk move slightly as she climbed onto it. Comfortable? I called. Yeah, she answered. Thank you. No problem. I faced the road again. For the next couple of hours, I drove without hearing much from her. Once or twice, I thought I heard her shifting behind the curtain, but the sound was so quiet that it might have come from the truck itself. The farther east I traveled, the darker the road seemed. Towns became less frequent, and long areas of empty land stretched on either side of the interstate. I kept checking the time. I was getting tired, but I had driven through worse. The truck stop near St. Louis was familiar to me, and I knew I could make it there safely. Once I fueled up, I planned to park, get some food, and sleep for several hours. I also needed to decide what to do about the young woman. She could probably find another ride at the truck stop, although I was not comfortable leaving her alone in the middle of the night. I thought I might ask another driver if he was heading farther east. At the very least, she could use the restroom, buy something to eat, and call her family. As I approached the exit, I called toward the bunk. Hey, we're getting close to the truck stop. There was no response. I waited a few seconds and called again. Miss, we'll be stopping soon. Still nothing. I smiled to myself. She was probably sleeping deeply. She had seemed exhausted before lying down. I raised my voice. Hey, time to wake up. Nothing. I considered pulling over, but the truck stop was only a few minutes away. It would be safer to wait until I was parked. I took the exit and followed the road toward the glowing truck stop signs. The parking area was busy, with rows of tractor trailers lined up beneath tall lights. I pulled toward the fuel lanes, slowed the truck, and brought it to a stop. After setting the parking brakes, I shut off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab felt heavy. I removed my seatbelt and called toward the bunk again. "We're here." There was no answer. I stood up from the driver's seat. My knees and back were stiff after several hours of driving. I stretched, then stepped between the seats. The curtain separating the cab from the sleeper area was closed. I reached for it and pulled it aside. The bunk was empty. For a moment, I simply stood there. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked toward the lower bunk, then checked the upper storage area. There was nowhere else she could have been. The young woman was gone. So was her bag. I stared at the bed. The blanket was smooth. The pillow was still in place. The sheets did not appear disturbed at all. It looked exactly as it had before she climbed into the back. I touched the blanket with one hand. It was cool. A strange feeling moved through me, but I tried to think logically. Maybe she had climbed out through the sleeper door. Some trucks have a small outside access door near the bunk. Mine did too. It was possible that she had opened it and left without telling me, although I had no idea how she could have done that while we were moving. I reached for the handle and pulled. The door did not move. It was still locked. I checked it again. Harder this time. Locked. I looked around the sleeper area, searching for anything she might have left behind. There was nothing. No shoe, no hair, no mark on the bed, and no sign that another person had ever been there. I returned to the front of the cab and checked the passenger door. It was closed and locked. I knew it had never opened while I was driving. If someone had opened that large door at highway speed, I would have heard it immediately. The wind alone would have filled the cab. The interior light might have come on. I would have noticed. I checked the floor where she had placed her bag. Empty. I stood in the middle of the cab, trying to understand what had happened. Since picking her up, I had driven between 40 and 70 miles per hour. I had not stopped once. I had not slowed enough for anyone to safely jump out. Even if she had somehow opened the sleeper door, she could not have left the truck without being badly injured or killed. And the door had been locked from the inside. I stepped out of the truck and looked around the fuel area. Several drivers were fueling their rigs. A man in a baseball cap walked toward the main building carrying a large drink cup. Cars moved through the parking lot. Everything looked normal. I searched near the passenger side of my truck. There was no sign of her. I walked around the trailer, looking underneath it and between the parked trucks. I knew it made no sense, but I kept expecting to see her walking away with her bag. She was nowhere. I went inside the truck stop and looked through the store. I checked the food area, the hallway near the restrooms, and the entrance. No young woman matching her description was there. I even asked the cashier if she had seen a young woman enter recently. I described her clothes and the dark travel bag. The cashier shook her head. "No, I don't think so." I returned to my truck. By then, my confusion had turned into fear. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked and looked at the curtain behind me. I did not want to open it again. Part of me feared that she would suddenly be sitting on the bunk, staring back at me. But another part of me wanted her to return. If she appeared again, at least there might be some kind of explanation. I forced myself to check the sleeper area one more time. It was still empty. I thought about the moment I had first seen her, standing beside the road. I remembered the way she had raised her thumb, the way she had smiled, and how quickly she had climbed into my truck. I remembered her clothes and how they seemed slightly out of date. I remembered her talking about going to New York City and becoming famous. Then I remembered something else. She had never taken out a phone. Even in 2014, almost everyone her age carried one. She had not checked the time, sent a message, or called anyone. When I suggested contacting her family, she had agreed, but never made any attempt to do it. I also could not remember seeing her reflection clearly in the passenger window at night, although I told myself that meant nothing. I had been focused on driving. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. I wondered whether a young woman had once disappeared along that road. Maybe she had been trying to reach New York and never made it. Maybe she had been hit by a car, murdered, or left to die somewhere nearby. Those thoughts were only guesses, and I had no proof, but sitting alone in that truck, they felt possible. I tried to sleep that night, but I could not. Every sound from the sleeper area made me open my eyes. The truck creaked as it cooled. Air brakes released somewhere in the parking lot. Engines started and stopped. Drivers walked past outside. Each time a shadow moved across the curtain, I thought she had returned. At one point, I heard what sounded like fabric shifting behind me. I turned on every light in the cab and pulled the curtain open. The bed was empty. I left the curtain open after that. By morning, I had barely slept at all. My head hurt, my eyes burned, and I felt sick from exhaustion. I was late for my delivery because I had to stop more often than planned. I could not keep my mind on the road. For days afterward, I kept wondering whether I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I had not. I remembered her voice clearly. I remembered the passenger seat moving when she climbed in. I remembered speaking to her for hours. I remembered hearing her answer when I asked if she was comfortable in the bunk. She had been there. I just had no idea what she was. I never found out who she was, where she came from, or what happened to her. I searched online once or twice for stories about missing women along that road, but I did not have enough information to find anything useful. I did not know the exact town, the highway number, or even the name of the place she claimed to be from. Eventually, I stopped looking. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about her when I drive alone at night. I picture her standing beneath that distant streetlight with her bag beside her, raising her hand as my truck approached. I wonder how many other drivers passed her before I stopped. I wonder whether anyone else has picked her up. Most of all, I wonder what might have happened if I had looked behind the curtain while the truck was still moving. That night changed one rule for me permanently. No matter how lonely the road is, no matter how harmless someone looks, and no matter how bad I feel about leaving them behind, I never pick up hitchhikers anymore. I know this may not sound as frightening as some of the other stories people tell, but it is still the scariest thing I can clearly remember happening to me. When I was 6 years old, I went into anaphylactic shock after eating a snack made from foods I had eaten many times before. I say it is the scariest thing I remember because something even more serious happened when I was much younger, but I have no real memory of it. When I was around 18 months old, I became seriously ill with complications connected to croup and tracheomalacia, a condition involving improper development or weakness of the trachea. I spent 6 days in intensive care. According to my parents, I came very close to dying. The doctors were struggling to understand why I was not improving until a specialist was finally flown in. My family later told me that the specialist recognized the problem very quickly and directed the other doctors on what to do. That event was probably more dangerous than the one that happened when I was 6, but it does not frighten me in the same personal way because I cannot remember it. I know about it only through stories my parents told me. The anaphylactic reaction is different. I remember almost everything. It is one of my earliest clear memories, and parts of it are still so sharp that I can picture them now. It began during an ordinary evening at home. My parents were making dinner in the kitchen. Both of them happened to be home, which was unusual because my father traveled frequently for work. My sister was home too. There was nothing unusual about the day. Nobody was expecting an emergency. Nobody knew that within a short time I would be struggling to breathe while my parents raced through traffic trying to reach a hospital. I was an impatient child, especially when I was hungry. Dinner was not ready yet, so I asked my mother if I could have a snack. She cut up some celery and peaches for me. Both were raw. Celery was one of my favorite foods, which may sound strange for a 6-year-old, but I loved it. Peaches were also something I had eaten before. Neither food seemed dangerous. I had eaten them many times. There had been small warning signs, but nobody understood what they meant. Whenever I ate certain raw fruits or vegetables, I sometimes developed mild red rashes around my face. The reaction was never severe enough to frighten anyone. I also had bad pollen allergies and often had irritated skin, so my parents thought I was simply a child who became rashy easily. A little redness around my mouth did not seem like an emergency. It did not seem like the beginning of a serious food allergy. At that time, my parents had never really been taught about food allergies or anaphylaxis. They were intelligent, educated people, but this was not something they had experience with. They did not know that a mild reaction on one occasion could become much more severe on another. They did not know that foods I had eaten before could suddenly cause a life-threatening reaction. They saw celery and peaches. They saw familiar food. They gave me the snack without any reason to believe they were placing me in danger. I ate it and went into my parents' bedroom to watch television. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. Then I began to feel tired. It was not normal tiredness. It was not the comfortable feeling of wanting to lie down after a long day. It was heavy and strange. My mind felt hazy. My body felt as though it were slowly shutting down. Even at 6 years old, I understood that something was wrong. I could not explain it, but I felt as though something bad was coming. The closest comparison I can make now is that it felt like sitting in the eye of a hurricane. Everything around me was still normal, but some part of me knew that something powerful and dangerous was very close. I lay across my parents' bed with my upper body resting on the mattress and my legs hanging over the edge. I wanted to sleep. The tiredness was pulling me down, and closing my eyes seemed easier than getting up. But another thought kept pushing through the haze. Get mommy. Get mommy now. It did not feel like an ordinary decision. It felt like an alarm inside my head. I did not know what was happening to my body, but something in me understood that I should not stay alone in that bedroom. I forced myself to get up and walked into the kitchen. My parents were still preparing dinner. I told my mother I did not feel well. Unfortunately, I had a habit of complaining or crying wolf when I was young. I might say I felt sick because I was tired, bored, impatient, or wanted attention. My parents did not immediately understand that this time was different. At first, they probably thought I was becoming impatient while waiting for dinner. Maybe I wanted another snack. Perhaps I did not want to watch television alone. They continued what they were doing. Then the swelling began. My lips started getting bigger. At first, it may have looked like a small reaction. Then my cheeks began to swell. The swelling continued upward toward one of my eyes. Soon, half of my face looked completely different. That was when my parents realized something serious was happening. The change was too fast and too dramatic to dismiss. My face was swelling in front of them. Then I began having trouble breathing. They gave me water, hoping it might help. I could not drink it. My throat felt blocked. It felt as though there were something enormous stuck inside it, something too large to swallow around. My whole mouth felt full. I could not understand why there was no space. I remember trying to breathe and feeling resistance. The air would not move normally. My father looked at me and said something like, "Look at her tongue. Why does her tongue look like that?" My tongue had swollen too. The reaction was spreading through my mouth and throat. I remember sitting on the stairwell beside the kitchen. We lived in a raised ranch, so the kitchen was upstairs, and the stairs led directly down toward the front door. My parents had me sit near the top while they tried to see what was happening. They asked me to open my mouth. Someone held a flashlight and shone it inside. I remember their faces changing. They were no longer mildly concerned. They were frightened. My father said, "She has to go to the hospital. She has to go now." My mother later told me that my throat had narrowed until the opening was about the size of a straw. It had almost completely swollen shut. At the time, I did not know what anaphylaxis was. My parents did not know either. They knew I was swelling and having difficulty breathing, but they did not understand how little time we may have had. They did not know that the reaction could continue getting worse within minutes. They did not have an epinephrine auto-injector in the house. There was no emergency allergy plan. There was only panic. Instead of calling 911, my parents decided to drive me to the hospital. Under ordinary circumstances, driving may have seemed faster and more direct. The hospital was a known location. My father could put me in the car immediately, and we could leave without waiting for an ambulance. But it was rush hour. We were in New Jersey. The route involved Route 1, where traffic could become heavy and unpredictable. Any delay could have been deadly. At the time, however, my parents were only trying to save me with the information they had. My father drove. My mother sat in the front passenger seat. My sister sat beside me in the back. The drive to the hospital became the worst part of the entire experience. By then, breathing was extremely difficult. Each time I tried to inhale, it felt as though I hit a wall. Air should move naturally. You normally do not have to think about every breath. That day, every breath became work. I tried to pull air in, but my swollen throat would not allow enough through. The more frightened I became, the harder I tried. The harder I tried, the more energy I used. I was crying and panicking, which probably made breathing even more difficult, but I was 6 years old and believed I was dying. I could not calm myself. I kicked the back of my father's seat. I begged him to go faster. He was already driving as quickly as traffic allowed, but from the back seat it felt as though the car was barely moving. I did not understand traffic laws, safety, or the danger of causing an accident. I only knew I could not breathe, and the hospital was somewhere ahead. Drive faster. That was all I wanted. Every red light felt impossible. Every car in front of us felt like an obstacle between me and air. I remember looking through the windows at the headlights and taillights around us. There were so many vehicles. Red lights stretched ahead. White lights moved in the opposite direction. As my condition worsened, the lights began to blur together. I do not know whether that happened because I was crying, because I was becoming weak, because of reduced oxygen, or because panic was changing how I saw everything. I only remember the road turning into a wash of lights. The car felt both too fast and far too slow. My father was trying to move through traffic without crashing. My mother was watching me from the front, probably trying to keep me conscious and calm. My sister was beside me, witnessing something she could not control. I cannot imagine what the drive was like for them. For me, it felt like death was happening slowly in the back seat. I was fully aware. I knew I was in serious danger. I could not name the medical problem, but I could feel my airway closing. People often describe dangerous situations by saying they thought they were going to die. I did not only think it. My body was in the process of failing. I was 6 years old, kicking the seat and begging my father to beat traffic because I could not get enough air. There was no dramatic music, no clear countdown, only the repeated effort to breathe and the feeling that each attempt was becoming less successful. Then I saw the red emergency sign at the hospital. That sign remains one of the clearest images from the entire day. After the long road, blurred lights, and traffic, The word emergency appeared ahead. It meant we had reached the place where people might be able to help me. My father pulled up. My mother grabbed me and ran inside, while my father went to park with my sister. Emergency departments often involve waiting, forms, and questions. That did not happen to me. You know something is seriously wrong when hospital staff take one look at you and move immediately. People approached us quickly. I remember several adults coming toward me at once. There was no calm conversation at the desk, no request to sit in the waiting room. They saw my swollen face, swollen tongue, and difficulty breathing and understood the emergency immediately. I was taken into a small treatment room. Everything became fast and confusing. People were touching me, speaking to one another, preparing medication, and trying to hold me still. I remember receiving an injection. It was probably epinephrine, although I was too young to know exactly what they gave me. I remember being injected twice, but I do not know what the second medication was. It may have been another emergency medicine used to help control the reaction, but I cannot say with certainty. I had a serious fear of needles. Even while I was struggling to breathe, I fought the injections. That seems irrational now, but childhood fear does not disappear simply because another danger is greater. A needle was something I could see. It was immediate and familiar. The swelling and airway problem were much larger dangers, but I did not fully understand them. I remember a doctor or nurse and my mother holding me down. I believe the injection went into my leg. I struggled and cried. The adults did not have time to gently persuade me. They needed to give me the medicine immediately. Then my memory goes black. I do not remember the medication beginning to work. I do not remember my breathing improving. I do not remember the swelling reducing. I do not remember what the doctors said to my mother. There is simply a missing section. The next thing I remember, my mother was no longer inside the room. A kind male nurse came over to me. The emergency had passed enough that the room no longer felt crowded and frantic. He spoke gently. He said, "You haven't had dinner. You must be so hungry. Do you want a snack?" I said yes. He came back with a sleeve of plain white crackers. They were probably the blandest crackers I had ever eaten. At that moment, they felt safe. There was something comforting about food that looked simple, dry, and harmless after a familiar snack had nearly killed me. I ate the crackers. I did not know that while I was recovering, the doctors were speaking very seriously to my parents. They were angry about the decision to drive me. My parents were told that I had been dangerously close to running out of time. The medical staff explained that calling 911 would have been safer because emergency responders could have begun treatment before reaching the hospital. An ambulance would also have had a way to move through traffic more effectively. If there had been an accident, a closed road, or a longer delay, I might not have survived the drive. The doctors were not angry because my parents did not care. They were angry because the situation had been so close. My parents had made the decision in panic without understanding what anaphylaxis was. They thought getting me into their car immediately was the fastest way to save me. They did not know that emergency treatment could have come to us. They did not know how quickly the airway could close. Afterward, they knew. I have never blamed them. They were intelligent, loving parents placed in an emergency they had never been taught to recognize. Food allergies were not part of their experience. They had seen mild rashes around my mouth, but had no reason to understand them as warnings of a possible life-threatening reaction. Once they realized I could not breathe, they acted. They got me to the hospital. The choice was not perfect, but I survived. Over the years that followed, both of my parents learned everything they could about my allergies. My mother in particular became extremely skilled at managing them. She read labels, asked questions, spoke with schools, checked ingredients, carried medication, and made sure other adults understood what to do. They did not make the same mistake twice. I was diagnosed with more allergies as I got older. The list became long. I am allergic to many fruits and vegetables. Celery and peaches remained major problems. I also developed or was diagnosed with a peanut allergy, because of course I did. Peanuts are one of the foods people immediately connect with severe allergy, but my first major reaction came from raw celery and peaches, foods most people would consider healthy and harmless. That experience changed the way food felt to me. For most people, eating is automatic. They see something familiar, take a bite, and think only about taste. For me, food became connected to risk. A fruit or vegetable could look normal and still cause swelling. A snack I had eaten before could suddenly become dangerous. The body does not care whether a food is healthy, natural, or familiar. If the immune system reacts badly, the result can be serious. I have not needed to use an epinephrine auto-injector since that day. That is something I am grateful for. It means I have been careful, and the people around me have helped keep me safe. But the fact that it has not happened again does not remove the memory. I still know what a closing throat feels like. I remember trying to breathe and finding no space. I remember the car lights blurring. I remember kicking the seat and begging my father to drive faster. I remember the hospital sign. That history affects what I am willing to eat now. There are foods I may be able to challenge under medical supervision. Some of the fruit allergies in particular may have changed or may be connected to pollen reactions rather than the same level of risk as my strongest allergies. A proper challenge could possibly show that certain foods are now safe for me. Not peanuts, not celery, not peaches. Those are not foods I plan to test casually, but there may be others I could discuss with specialists and possibly introduce again in a controlled setting. The problem is that I also have an anxiety disorder. To another person, a supervised food challenge may sound simple. You go to a medical office. You eat a very small amount. Professionals watch you closely. If nothing happens, you gradually eat more. Emergency treatment is available if a reaction begins. Logically, that is far safer than eating something unknown at home. Emotionally, it is much more difficult. My earliest clear memory of food is connected to nearly suffocating. My mind does not treat a food challenge as a harmless test. It treats it as deliberately repeating the beginning of the worst experience of my life. Even in a hospital or allergy clinic, I would still have to put the food in my mouth and wait. I would need to notice every sensation. A dry throat, a small itch, warm skin, a strange breath. Someone without anxiety may be able to observe those feelings calmly. My mind could turn each one into the start of anaphylaxis. Panic symptoms can also feel similar to an allergic reaction. The throat can feel tight. Breathing can become difficult. The heart can race. The mouth can feel dry. Then I would need to work out whether I was experiencing anxiety or a real reaction. That thought alone is enough to make me avoid most challenges. I did successfully regain sesame seeds. That was one battle I chose to fight. The challenge worked, and I was able to add sesame back into my life. I am proud of that. It showed that not every food has to remain permanently forbidden. Still, I am not ready to challenge everything else. People may think I am being irrational. They may say I would be safer doing it under medical supervision, or that I am limiting my diet more than necessary. They may be correct from a purely medical or practical point of view. But anxiety is not only a list of logical facts. It is the body remembering danger. When I think about eating a food that once caused a rash or appeared on an allergy list, I do not only think about nutrition or test results. I remember being 6 years old in the back seat of a car. I remember trying to pull air through a throat that was almost closed. I remember believing I was dying while traffic surrounded us. That memory is stronger than someone saying, "It will probably be fine." I understand that avoiding every possible challenge may not be ideal forever. I understand that allergies can change. I understand that medical supervision exists for a reason. But people with anxiety have to choose where to spend their courage. Some battles are necessary. Others can wait. Right now, this is one I am not willing to choose. There are enough foods I can eat safely. I have learned how to manage my life. Giving myself more options would be convenient, but convenience is not always worth the emotional cost. Maybe one day I will feel differently. Maybe I will decide to challenge another fruit. Perhaps medical treatment for anxiety will make the process easier. But I am not going to force myself simply because someone else thinks the fear is unreasonable. The fear came from a real event. I did not imagine my throat closing. I did not invent the swollen tongue. I did not exaggerate the emergency. Doctors believed I had only minutes left. My parents were told that one traffic delay might have changed the ending. That kind of experience leaves a mark even when the body recovers. Sometimes I think about how ordinary the beginning was. My parents were both home. Dinner was cooking. My sister was nearby. I asked for a snack. My mother cut up my favorite food and some fruit. There was no strange smell, no spoiled food, and no obvious danger. The celery was crisp. The peaches were fresh. I had eaten both before. Then, within minutes, I was lying across a bed feeling a strange tiredness and a sense that something terrible was approaching. That feeling may have saved me. If I had allowed myself to fall asleep, my parents might not have noticed the reaction until I was unable to wake or call for help. Instead, something inside me said, "Get mommy." I listened. At 6 years old, I did not know the words allergic reaction, airway swelling, or anaphylaxis. I knew only that I should not stay alone. That instinct brought me into the kitchen where my parents could see the swelling begin. The face is difficult to hide when it changes that quickly. My lips, cheeks, eye area, tongue, and throat all showed that something was terribly wrong. If the reaction had happened only internally at first, the danger might have been harder for them to recognize. The visible swelling forced everyone to act. The stairwell beside the kitchen remains another clear image. I remember sitting there while my parents looked into my mouth with a flashlight. It was an ordinary part of our home. I had probably walked up and down those stairs thousands of times. That evening, it became the place where my father decided I needed a hospital immediately. The front door was only a short distance below. The car was outside. Then we were moving. The drive feels longer in memory than it probably was. Fear stretches time. Every vehicle seemed to delay us. Every attempt to breathe became its own emergency. I remember kicking the seat because physical action was the only way I could express how urgent it felt. My father could not create an empty road. He could not make the traffic disappear. He could only drive. My mother could not open my throat. She could only watch me and hope we reached the hospital. My sister could do nothing except sit beside me. We were all trapped in that car together. I was the one physically dying, but the others were forced to watch. My parents may have carried their own trauma afterward. They probably replayed the decision not to call an ambulance. The doctor's anger may have made the guilt worse, but guilt should not erase the truth that they saved me with the knowledge they had. They recognized the danger. They did not tell me to lie down and wait. They did not assume the swelling would pass. They took me to emergency care. Once they learned better procedures, they followed them. A person cannot use knowledge they have never been given. My parents became experts because they never wanted to face that ignorance again. That is what good parents do after a frightening mistake or misunderstanding. They learn. They prepare. They protect. The hospital memory ends strangely peacefully. After the injections, panic, restraints, and darkness, there is a kind nurse offering me crackers. The contrast is almost unbelievable. Minutes earlier, adults had been fighting to keep my airway open. Then someone asked whether I was hungry. I was still a child. Once the immediate danger passed, hunger returned. The crackers were plain and dry, but I ate them. They represented normal life. A snack had caused the emergency. Another snack appeared after I survived it. The difference was that the crackers felt controlled and safe. I sometimes wonder whether the nurse knew how important that simple kindness would become in my memory. He may have been doing an ordinary part of his job. A child had missed dinner and needed something bland. To me, his calm voice marked the point when the world stopped feeling like an emergency. The crowd of medical staff was gone. My breathing had returned. My mother was speaking with doctors outside. I could eat. I was alive. That is why this remains the scariest event I remember. It contains the physical terror of suffocation, but also the confusion of being a child who does not understand why familiar food has turned dangerous. I could not reason my way through it. I could only feel my body closing. People often think anaphylaxis means a rash, swelling, or discomfort. Those can be parts of it, but severe anaphylaxis can move frighteningly fast. In my memory, the distance between eating celery and struggling for air was very short. There was not enough time for long discussion or research. My parents had to act while learning what was happening. I had to survive until treatment reached me. I did. I was lucky that both parents were home. If only one had been there, handling the drive, my sister and me might have been even more difficult. I was lucky I left the bedroom instead of falling asleep. I was lucky traffic moved well enough. I was lucky the hospital staff recognized the reaction immediately. I was lucky the medication worked. There are many points where the story could have ended differently. That awareness stays with me. I do not live every day expecting another reaction. I carry medication, avoid known allergens, read labels, and make careful choices. Most of the time, life is normal, but the memory has never become completely harmless. It appears whenever someone suggests I try a food again. It appears when I feel an unexplained itch after eating. It appears when my throat feels dry. My rational mind may know the sensation is probably anxiety, pollen, or nothing serious. The 6-year-old part of me remembers the back seat. That child is still asking my father to drive faster. I do not blame my parents. I do not blame the celery or peaches as though food has an intention. I do not even blame myself for avoiding challenges now. The experience happened, and my mind adapted around it. Perhaps some of those adaptations are more cautious than medically necessary. They also helped keep me safe for years. I have not needed another EpiPen since that day. That matters. Maybe I could eat more foods than I currently allow myself. Maybe future testing will prove that. But safety is not only about what the body can technically survive. It is also about what the mind is ready to face. For now, I choose the foods I know. I carry what I need. I stay away from peanuts, celery, peaches, and the other foods that feel too dangerous. I accept that anxiety limits me in this area. There are other battles I can fight. This one can wait. Some people may think the fear is excessive because the reaction happened so long ago. To me, the memory does not feel old. I can still see the taillights. I can still see the emergency sign. I can still hear my father asking why my tongue looked wrong. I can still feel the wall in my throat each time I tried to breathe. 6 years old is young, but it is old enough to understand when air is disappearing. I did not know the medical name. I knew I was dying. Then the hospital doors opened. People moved quickly. A needle went into my leg, and the memory disappeared into blackness. When it returned, I was eating plain crackers. That is the whole story in its simplest form. A normal snack. A strange tiredness, a warning in my head to find my mother, a face swelling beyond recognition, a throat closing to the size of a straw, a desperate drive through rush hour traffic, a hospital staff moving fast enough to save me, and years later, an adult who still cannot look at food challenges as ordinary medical tests. Maybe that fear is not rational anymore, but it was created by something real. When you have felt your airway close once, you never completely forget how precious an easy breath is. I am from Ireland, and Ireland is not a place most people normally connect with hurricanes. We do not usually experience the huge tropical storms people associate with the Caribbean or the southern United States. We do, however, sometimes receive the remains of powerful Atlantic hurricanes after they travel across the ocean. And we also get major storms from farther north that can produce winds strong enough to reach hurricane force. They may not technically be hurricanes, but when you are standing in the middle of one, or trapped on a ferry while the sea rises around you, the difference in classification does not feel very important. I was caught in the middle of one of those storms once. I was on a ferry between Scotland and Ireland. This happened during the series of severe storms that hit around Christmas in 2013. At the time, I was attending university in Scotland. Like many students studying away from home, I planned to travel back to Ireland for Christmas. The journey usually involved driving across to the west coast of Scotland and then taking a ferry over to Ireland. I had made the trip before, so I knew the general route and what to expect. Normally, the ferry crossing was not especially frightening. The ship was large enough to carry cars, heavy goods vehicles, and several hundred passengers. It was not a tiny fishing boat that would be thrown around by every small wave. On an ordinary crossing, the ferry might move slightly. A few people might become seasick if the water was rough, but most passengers could walk around, eat, drink, or sit near a window without giving the sea much thought. I expected this trip to be similar. I knew a storm was moving in, but I believed the ferry company would cancel the crossing if conditions became genuinely dangerous. Large passenger ferries do not normally sail blindly into severe weather. There are forecasts, warnings, experienced crews, and decisions made by people who understand the sea far better than an ordinary passenger. I trusted that system. The first challenge was reaching the port. By the time I began the drive, the storm was already arriving with serious force. The weather was much worse than I had expected when I first planned the journey. A large part of the route consisted of narrow, winding roads. Some climbed along the sides of mountains, with rock or steep land rising on one side and open views toward the sea on the other. Those roads could already be stressful in normal weather. During the storm, they became terrifying. Water was pouring across the road. It did not look like ordinary rain gathering in small puddles. In places, it seemed as though the mountain itself was emptying water onto the road. Streams ran down the slopes and crossed the pavement. Rain hit the windshield so heavily that the wipers struggled to keep the view clear. I had to concentrate constantly. The road twisted and turned, and there were sections where I could not see far ahead. Each bend could hide standing water, fallen branches, another vehicle, or some other obstacle. The wind was the worst part. It was so loud around the car that I could barely hear anything else. I turned the music up, hoping it would cover the sound and make me feel calmer. It did not work. I kept increasing the volume until the music was blasting through the speakers, but the wind still seemed louder. It roared around the doors, pushed against the windows, and shook the entire vehicle. The sound made the storm feel alive. It was as though something enormous was moving around the car, testing it from different directions. My vehicle was small, which normally made it easy to drive along narrow roads. In those conditions, its size made me feel dangerously exposed. Each strong gust pushed against the side. I could feel the steering wheel pull in my hands. I had to make constant corrections to stay in my lane. Driving through strong wind is strange, because the road may look clear while an invisible force is trying to move the car sideways. You cannot see the gust before it hits. You only feel the vehicle suddenly shift. A small mistake could send the tires toward the edge of the road. Some sections faced directly toward the sea, which made the wind even more powerful. At one point, I came around a bend and turned directly into it. A huge gust hit the front of the car. I had been traveling at around 45 miles per hour. The force of the wind slowed me to about 20 almost immediately. It felt as though I had driven into a solid wall. My foot was still pressing the accelerator, but the car could not maintain its speed. The engine worked harder while the storm pushed against me. That moment made me understand how powerful the wind truly was. A car moving at road speed had been slowed by more than half without braking. I began wondering whether I should turn back. The problem was that turning back would mean driving through the same conditions again, and I was already deep into the route. I did not know whether the storm would become worse behind me or whether the road would remain open. I also wanted to get home for Christmas. That desire kept pulling me forward, even when continuing felt dangerous. Eventually, I ended up behind a large HGV. It was a heavy truck with a trailer, much larger than my car. Normally, being trapped behind a slow truck on winding roads might be frustrating. During that storm, the truck became the safest thing I could have found. The trailer blocked much of the wind. I moved close enough to remain in the protected area behind it while still leaving enough distance to react if the truck slowed. The difference was immediate. The wind still hit the car, but not with the same full force. The truck created a moving wall in front of me. Its size broke the strongest gusts before they reached my small vehicle. I followed it for as long as I could. The driver may have noticed me staying behind him. I like to think he understood why I was there and allowed me to remain in his shelter. The truck moved carefully through the storm, and I copied every change in speed. When it slowed for a bend, I slowed. When it moved around water, I followed its path. It felt like being guided through the worst part of the journey by someone who had far more weight and stability than I did. I genuinely believe that truck may have saved me. Without it, another side gust could have pushed my car off the road. In some areas, there was very little space for a mistake. The road was narrow, the weather was violent, and the sea, or steep ground, was close. I do not know the driver's name or where he was going. He may never have known how frightened I was. To him, I may have been only a small car following unusually closely. To me, he was the reason I reached the port. When I finally arrived, I expected to see canceled sailings, stranded passengers, and staff telling everyone to return home. The weather during the drive had been so severe that I could not imagine a passenger ferry leaving port. But by the time I reached the terminal, the conditions had changed. The rain had almost completely stopped. The wind was much weaker, with only an occasional gust. The port felt strangely calm compared with the roads I had just traveled. It was almost difficult to believe the same storm had produced the drive behind me. The storm had moved quickly. It had passed over the area and was continuing toward Ireland. The sea was still rough, but it did not look as terrible as I had expected. I learned that the ferry was still scheduled to depart. The understanding was that the storm was moving faster than us. It had already passed the Scottish coast and would continue ahead toward Ireland. Our crossing was relatively short, so the ship was expected to remain behind the worst of it. That explanation made sense. I trusted the crew and the forecast. If trained people believed the crossing was safe, I had no reason to argue. I boarded with the other passengers. Cars and trucks were loaded into the vehicle deck. The ferry was designed to secure them during rough water, and I assumed everything would remain safely in position. I left my car below and moved into the passenger area. At the beginning, the crossing did not seem too bad. The ferry moved through rough water, but it was still within the range of what I had experienced before. The ship rose and fell slightly. People settled into seats, bought drinks, talked, or looked through the windows. Some passengers were probably nervous, but there was no immediate panic. We had been told the storm was ahead of us. The ferry would follow after it. Unfortunately, that was not what happened. When we were around halfway between Scotland and Ireland, the weather changed. By that point, we were too far from the Scottish coast for turning around to feel like a simple option. We were somewhere in the middle of the crossing, with open water in every direction. The storm slowed down. It also strengthened. Instead of remaining ahead, it waited for us. We sailed directly into it. The change was not subtle. The ship began moving much more violently. The ferry I had taken many times before, the large vessel capable of carrying heavy trucks and hundreds of passengers, suddenly felt small. The sea began throwing it around like a toy. It rose sharply, dropped, tilted to one side, and then rolled back the other way. Standing became difficult. At times, it was nearly impossible. People trying to walk had to hold walls, seats, railings, or anything else within reach. A person could take one step and then be pushed sideways by the movement of the ship. Chairs began tipping. Some slid or fell when the ferry leaned far enough. Drinks moved across tables. Passengers had to grab cups and bottles before they fell to the floor. Anything not secured became dangerous. A simple object could slide suddenly and strike someone. The atmosphere inside changed quickly. Normal conversation faded. People began watching the windows and one another. Some tried to laugh or make jokes, but the humor sounded nervous. Others became very quiet. The ship continued rising and falling. Every large movement created sounds from the structure, furniture, and objects shifting around us. The ferry was built to handle difficult seas, but hearing it creak and shake did not make me feel safe. People began becoming seasick. Some rushed toward bathrooms, others remained in their seats, holding bags or keeping their heads down. The smell and sound of sickness spread through parts of the passenger area, making other people feel worse. I stayed seated. Moving seemed more dangerous than remaining where I was. I held on to whatever I could and tried to keep my body stable as the ship rolled. I was near a window. Normally, a window seat would be enjoyable because I could watch the sea and see the coastline approaching. That day, it gave me a clear view of the size of the storm. At one point, I looked outside and saw a swell rising beside the ferry. It towered over the entire ship. I had to look upward to see the top of it. That image has stayed with me. A ferry large enough to carry trucks looked small beside the water. The wave rose like a wall. For a moment, it seemed impossible that the ship could climb over it or survive if the full weight of it came down across us. I knew large ships were designed for rough seas. I knew the captain and crew had experience, but those facts became difficult to trust when I saw water higher than the vessel. The ocean did not care how large the ferry felt from land. Out there, it was only another object being pushed through wind and water. The wave passed, and the ship continued. Then came another rise, another drop, and another violent tilt. I began thinking about what would happen if a wave struck us at the wrong angle. Could the ferry roll too far? Could water enter the vehicle deck? Could the vehicles break free? Could the engines fail? I did not know enough about ships to answer those questions. That ignorance made the fear worse. I had no control and very little understanding of what the vessel could survive. All I could do was sit and hope the people operating it knew exactly what they were doing. At some point, we learned that all the ferries scheduled after ours had been canceled. The storm had become too dangerous for them to leave. That information was terrifying. It meant the conditions were no longer considered safe. If we had arrived at the port a little later, we would never have been allowed to sail. But we were already out there. We were alone in the middle of the storm, knowing other ferries were safely remaining in port. There was something deeply frightening about being the last ship to leave before everything closed. It made the crossing feel like a mistake that had been discovered too late. We should not have been there. Everyone knew it. But there was no easy way to remove us from the sea. We could not simply stop and wait by the side of the road. The ferry had to continue. Turning back would mean fighting through the same storm towards Scotland. Ireland was ahead, so the ship pushed forward as fast as it could. The engines worked against the wind, waves, and current. Under normal conditions, the crossing would have taken much less time. That day, the storm slowed us. The journey took around 45 minutes longer than expected. 45 minutes may not sound like a long delay on land. In those conditions, it felt endless. Every extra minute meant another series of waves, another violent tilt, another chance for something to fail. I kept waiting for the movement to ease. It did not. The ferry would climb one swell, pause for a moment near the top, and then drop. My stomach felt as though it were being left behind. The ship would strike the next part of the water with a heavy impact. Then it would roll sideways again. I thought about my car below. Vehicles were secured on the deck, but the ferry was moving so violently that I imagined them sliding into one another. The HGVs were enormous. If one broke loose, it could cause serious damage. I pictured cars crashing against walls, alarms sounding, and fuel leaking across the deck. I had no way to check. Passengers were not allowed to return to their vehicles during the crossing, especially in dangerous conditions. All I could do was hope the securing equipment held. The helplessness was unlike anything I had experienced before. During the drive to the port, I had been terrified, but I still had some control. I held the steering wheel. I controlled my speed. I chose to follow the truck. I could stop if I found a safe place. On the ferry, I had nothing to do. I could not help the captain. I could not calm the sea. I could not change our route. I could not make the ship move faster. I could not even stand properly. I sat while the storm decided how violently we would move. It was humbling. On land, people build roads, cities, ports, and huge ships. We become used to feeling powerful and protected by technology. The storm made all of that feel temporary. The ferry was an impressive machine, but the sea was much larger. The wind and waves could move hundreds or thousands of tons as though they were nothing. I understood how people in earlier centuries must have felt when crossing open water with far smaller ships and no accurate weather information. The ocean can create a kind of fear that is difficult to experience anywhere else. There is no solid ground. There is no nearby shelter. The danger surrounds you in every direction. If the ship fails, there is nowhere simple to go. The water is cold, deep, and violent. Even life jackets and rescue boats seem uncertain when waves are towering over the vessel. I tried not to think about evacuation. If the ferry was difficult to stand on, how would hundreds of passengers reach lifeboats? How would those boats be lowered in that sea? Could anyone survive long in the winter water? Those questions were useless, but fear kept producing them. I watched the other passengers. Some looked pale and ill. Some stared straight ahead. Others closed their eyes or held on to family members. People who had been strangers when we boarded now shared the same fear. Nobody could leave. Nobody could choose another route. We were all waiting for the same thing, the Irish coast. The crew remained professional. I do not remember anyone announcing that we were in immediate danger. They may have tried to reassure us or simply continued their work. Their calm behavior mattered. If crew members had appeared frightened, panic would have spread quickly. They had likely experienced rough seas before and understood the ferry's limits. What felt like the ship was about to roll over may still have been within its design. But passengers do not experience storms through engineering measurements. We experience them through the floor moving beneath us, chairs falling, and waves rising above the windows. I had no instrument telling me the ferry was safe. I had only the crew's calmness and the fact that the ship was still moving. I held on to those facts. The ship had not lost power. No emergency alarm had sounded. Water was not pouring into the passenger area. The crew had not ordered us to put on life jackets. We were still heading toward Ireland. I repeated those things in my mind whenever the fear became too strong. Then another wave would lift us, and the reassurance would disappear. The storm seemed determined to remind us who had control. Eventually, after what felt like far longer than the actual crossing, signs of the destination began to appear. Perhaps we could see lights or coastline through the weather. The knowledge that land was close gave everyone new hope. But being near port did not mean the danger had ended. Entering a harbor during severe wind and rough water can be difficult. The ferry still had to approach correctly and dock. I waited for the motion to become smaller. Slowly, the shelter of the coast and harbor began reducing the worst of the waves. The ferry still moved, but not with the same violence. The floor became easier to trust. People could stand without immediately being thrown sideways. The change felt almost unbelievable. After so long being tossed around, even rough movement seemed calm. When we finally reached the port, the relief was enormous. The ferry had made it. The crew had brought us across despite the storm, strong currents, and extra travel time. No giant wave had overwhelmed the ship. The engines had continued working. The ferry remained upright. We had survived the crossing. Passengers prepared to return to the vehicle deck. I was worried about what we would find. After all the rolling and pitching, I expected cars and trucks to be damaged. I imagined broken straps, vehicles pressed together, shattered windows, and loose cargo. By some miracle, everything had remained in place. The cars were still where they had been parked. The HGVs had not moved across the deck. The securing systems had done their job. Seeing my small car sitting safely below felt almost emotional. That vehicle had survived the mountain roads, the hurricane force wind, and the violent ferry crossing. I climbed inside and prepared to drive home for Christmas. The journey was not completely finished, but reaching Ireland felt like the end of the danger. There was solid ground beneath the tires. Even if the weather remained bad, I could stop, turn, or seek shelter. I was no longer trapped on open water. I made it home. Christmas took place as planned. Family, food, warmth, and the safety of being indoors felt more valuable after the journey. People may have asked about the crossing, and I tried to explain how rough it had been. It is difficult to describe that kind of experience to someone who was not there. Saying the ferry moved violently or the waves were large does not fully capture it. You have to feel a ship tilt beneath you while furniture falls. You have to look out a window and see a wall of water higher than the vessel. You have to know every later ferry has been canceled while yours is still trapped at sea. That knowledge changes rough weather into something far more frightening. After Christmas, I was supposed to return to Scotland. On the day I planned to leave, another huge storm arrived. The ferry was canceled. Under normal circumstances, cancellation would have been frustrating. It would delay my return, interfere with plans, and create extra work. This time, I felt relieved. I did not want to test my luck again. I had already experienced one crossing that should probably never have happened. I had already watched the sea throw a large ferry around like a toy. I did not need to prove I could survive it twice. When I heard the service would not sail, I accepted the delay happily. The company had made the safe decision before passengers were placed in danger. I could remain on land and wait. That felt like a gift. The experience changed the way I think about storms and ferry travel. Before it happened, weather warnings could feel slightly abstract. A forecast might mention high winds, rough seas, or severe conditions, but those were only words. Afterward, I understood what hurricane force wind could do. I had felt it slow my car from 45 miles per hour to 20. I had felt it push against the vehicle on narrow mountain roads. I had hidden behind a truck because it was the only thing keeping the strongest gusts away. Then I had seen what the same storm could do to a ferry. It could move a ship built to carry heavy trucks as though it were a toy. The storm was not technically a hurricane, but that distinction would not have comforted anyone on board. The wind had hurricane strength. The sea had waves large enough to tower above us. The danger was real, regardless of the name. I also gained a new respect for HGV drivers. The driver who sheltered my car during the journey to the port may not have thought he was helping me. He was simply driving his route, but his truck created a safe space in the wind. Following him gave me stability and a visible guide through rain and water. Without that protection, I genuinely believe I could have been pushed from the road. I wish I had been able to thank him. Perhaps he noticed the small car behind him and understood. Maybe he adjusted his speed to let me remain there. I will never know. He disappeared into the journey like many strangers who help without realizing how important they were. The ferry crew also earned my respect. While passengers sat frightened and sick, they continued operating a large vessel through one of the worst storms I had ever seen. The captain had to make decisions using changing weather information. The storm had slowed and strengthened after we sailed. What had been expected to remain ahead of us became something we had to cross. The crew could not change the weather. They had to use their experience, the engines, and the ship's design to bring us safely to port. They succeeded. I do not know how close we came to real disaster. It is possible the ferry was never in danger of sinking, and that the movement, while terrifying, remained within safe limits. Large ships can survive conditions that feel impossible to passengers. The towering swell may have looked worse from my position than it truly was. But fear does not depend only on technical danger. The experience was terrifying because I did not know the limits. I did not know how much more the ferry could take. I did not know whether the next wave would be larger. I did not know whether the vehicles were secure. I did not know if the storm would strengthen again. Uncertainty turned every violent movement into a possible beginning of disaster. That is what I remember most clearly. Not one single wave or sound, but the long period of waiting without control. Sitting by the window, watching water rise higher than the ship, feeling the floor lean beneath me, hearing objects fall, seeing people become sick, knowing ferries behind us had been canceled, understanding that we were alone out there because no other vessel was being allowed to follow. We were in a place we should not have been, and the only way out was forward. The journey took 45 minutes longer than usual, but emotionally it felt like hours. Every minute had to be endured separately. There was no way to skip ahead to the harbor. The ferry had to cross every mile. I had to feel every rise and fall. When we finally reached Ireland, I understood the value of solid ground in a way I never had before. The vehicle deck opened, engines started, and cars drove out. Those ordinary sounds felt comforting. The ship had carried us through. The vehicles had remained secured. I could continue home. I had set out from Scotland hoping to reach Ireland for Christmas. I drove through rain, pouring down mountain roads, and wind loud enough to overpower music blasting inside my car. A gust slowed my car by more than half. A truck driver gave me enough protection to reach the port. The weather seemed calmer when I arrived, and the ferry left because the storm was expected to remain ahead of us. Halfway across, the storm slowed and strengthened. We sailed directly into it. The ship tilted so violently that chairs fell and drinks slid from tables. Passengers became sick. A wave rose so high beside the ferry that I had to look upward to see its top. Every later ferry was canceled, but we were already at sea. The strong wind and current added 45 minutes to the crossing. All we could do was sit and hope the ship would not be overwhelmed. Somehow, it reached the other side. Every vehicle remained in place. I made it home for Christmas. When another storm canceled my return ferry, I felt nothing but relief. I had already learned how small even a large ship can feel in the middle of a powerful sea. I had no interest in learning that lesson a second time.